The tornado threat over the next few days is not one that you're going to want to sleep on, especially after the big time damaging derecho that we just had on Tuesday. I'm going to break down everything that you need to know so that you can stay safe and stay weather aware at the tail end of your week and going into your weekend. And I also have two big announcements. One of those is that Mikey Plemons, one of our storm chasers, is going to be going to Brazil to storm chase in September to help bring severe weather awareness to parts of Brazil that otherwise don't have a lot of mainstream media coverage in terms of that severe weather. And then we also have Met Mondays, our new podcast coming out this coming Monday, and another big announcement is going to be made during that podcast, so make sure to tune in on Monday. But without any further ado, let's get right into the forecast. Jumping right into our day one categorical outlook, you're going to notice that we do have a 2 out of 5 slight risk that is in place for Iowa and central Illinois. And so that's going to include partially that bowling ball that we've got going on right now. I'm going to show you in just a second. We've got a big old windbag event that's rolling through Iowa at the moment. There's currently a tornado warning in Greene County as I'm recording this, but that slight risk is going to extend through Iowa and Illinois. We also have a marginal risk that's going to include a very, very large area all the way back through Denver and even down into the panhandle of Oklahoma. And then we have a secondary marginal risk that's going to be out in towards Nevada and Utah, and then even a third marginal risk all the way up in the Northeast. In both of those areas, we could see some gusty winds, maybe a couple of small hailstones, and we'll show you those maps in just a minute. There's also going to be a sneaky little tornado threat back towards Illinois and Iowa over the next couple of days. Here's a look at that tornado outlook for the day. There is that 2%. It's going to stretch all the way from just east of Omaha through Des Moines and all the way back down through Indianapolis. And yes, this is a lower end tornado threat today, just a 2%. It's going to be the same deal for tomorrow, but make sure that you're taking it seriously, as these types of events can sometimes be the most misleading, because it only takes one tornado to sometimes cause significant damage to life and property. So make sure that you're taking it seriously, even though it is a lower end risk today, and there is a lot of uncertainty in the forecast. Just make sure that you're paying attention and have multiple ways to receive alerts if you are in this area. The wind probabilistic outlook is where things get a little bit spicier, as we do have all three areas included in at least a 5% risk for damaging winds. That's going to include Nevada and Utah, and then our entire region of that marginal risk that stretches all the way from Denver down through the Oklahoma Panhandle and then back into the Ohio Valley towards the Midwest. And then we're also going to have that 5% included back in the Northeast. We do have a 15% also included from Iowa through central Illinois as well. That's mostly associated with that giant windbag that's going on right this moment. Today's hail outlook is going to include a 5% risk for a lot of areas in the middle of the country. Like I said, near Denver all the way through Kansas, and then into Iowa through Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, even parts of southwestern Ohio, where a couple isolated damaging hailstones are definitely possible and can't be ruled out. Same deal back into the Northeast, where a 5% is going to be present there as well. Hail, not a major threat for today, though. Friday's setup is going to pose another one of those sneakier types of setups. We're going to have a marginal risk already in place back towards Denver, all the way out through Kansas City, through Indianapolis, and then down through Kentucky, even into North Carolina and the Virginias. So one of these risk zones that you could see a similar situation to today, where you get that smaller area that's upgraded to a 2 out of 5 slight risk. But right now, just looking at a marginal risk in place, as a lot of tomorrow's setup, which again is Friday, is going to be determined on what happens today, which is Thursday. Friday's tornado outlook is going to include another 2% risk, basically just centered around Des Moines here. It's going to include a lot of central Iowa and southern Iowa, as well as a little bit of northern Missouri. A lot of areas that have seen some tornadoes this year, like the Unionville, Missouri tornado just across the border, just south of Iowa. And again, this is not a super significant setup or anything like that, but it is one that could bring at least a tornado or two. So it's one that you want to take seriously and make sure that you have multiple ways to receive alerts, as it will be a little less talked about in your mainstream media. Our wind outlook for tomorrow, which is Friday, is going to include a 5% for a pretty similar area to what we have today on Thursday, all the way from Denver back through Kansas and then towards the Midwest through Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, down through the Ohio Valley and towards the Virginias and even parts of North Carolina. So a lot of areas that could see at least some amount of damaging wind in isolated instances on Friday. But again, not a super robust severe weather outbreak. It is possible that we do get an upgrade to a 15% somewhere within this region, though, maybe towards Illinois, Indiana, or Kentucky, as the details get a little bit more resolved going into Friday. Our hail outlook is going to include a 5% risk for isolated instances of damaging hail in eastern Colorado off the Rockies. That's nothing unusual this time of year or really in general. And then we also have a 5% risk where our tornado risk is. That's the most favorable environment, so it seems anyway, for a couple of supercells with strong rotating updrafts capable of producing both tornadoes and hailstones. Again, it is a lower end threat, but it is still something to pay attention to, so make sure you have multiple ways to receive alerts. Saturday's setup will be a little bit interesting, as we do have a marginal risk that that is already in place all the way back from off the Rockies through the Midwest and even down through the Carolinas for Saturday. And I think we're going to have a little bit of an MCV or a mesoscale convective vortex setting up sometime on Saturday that could actually bring a little bit of a risk for tornadoes, especially back towards Indiana and Illinois, maybe even Western Ohio as well. So that's definitely going to be something to pay attention to as we move into Saturday, but still a lot of details to resolve on that. But definitely make sure that you're ready for that weekend forecast. Looking around the United States right now, we do have this setup that is rolling on through Iowa, and then eventually we'll be pushing into Illinois. We have that classic bookend setup here where you've got that comma head shape starting to form. And that's why we've seen a couple of tornado warnings on this. You can see influence of the rear inflow jet with a couple of these little notches forming in various parts of this line. And in general, this is just a strong line of thunderstorms that is rolling through, producing up to 70-mile-per-hour winds at times. And it did pose at least some tornado threat a little bit ago. When you look at these velocities, you can see that we have a very, very significant looking essentially mini front here, where this storm is just bringing a massive Boeing segment with tons of damaging winds that could be rolling on through eventually towards Des Moines here over the next hour, probably before this video gets uploaded. So definitely a threat to continue to watch as this one continues off through Iowa and eventually down towards Illinois. Taking a look at the timing of our severe weather today, we are going to watch this system continue to roll on through Iowa, eventually through Illinois, and it'll fizzle out closer to Indiana. But you'll notice that later on into this evening, we're going to see that second wave that's going to start to develop all the way from central Iowa back through the Chicago area and even down towards Indianapolis. That's going to bring that secondary risk for severe weather that could cause some problems, especially because it'll be a little bit more of a nighttime threat after sunset. That's going to be one to pay close attention to this evening. And then as we go into the overnight hours, those storms are going to continue even by 4 a.m. on Friday, looking like a lot of thunderstorms throughout our main areas of concern. And then as we go towards Friday afternoon and evening, you're going to notice that we get that initial development, and that's going to be where that greatest tornado threat is going to be tomorrow evening, maybe closer to around dinner time. And that's going to pose that threat for those isolated instances of damaging hail and tornadoes for any supercells that can sustain themselves before our storm mode gets too messy and our storms get a little bit too clustered up. Then as we go forward for the rest of Friday evening, things are going to push off towards the Chicago area throughout northern Illinois, and eventually they will continue down towards Indianapolis as well as we go later on into the day and evening on Friday. Now, really quickly, before we get into the meteorology of today and the next few days as we go into the weekend, I wanted to point out that you're going to see online a lot of people talking about this below average temperature anomaly business that's going to be showing up, where you're going to see temperatures as far as 13 degrees below average in areas in the Midwest. I don't think it's very likely that this happens, but the GFS has been pretty consistent on trying to sniff out a signature for the end of the month. You're going to see over a couple of different runs here, all of them showing somewhat below average temperatures, except the 12Z run from yesterday, the 12th. And then even as we compare across different models, the AI GFS showing a similar story, the GEFS and the AI GEFS all showing somewhat of a below average temperature anomaly for the end of the month. Again, I don't think it's going to be nearly as extreme as what the GFS is trying to tell you with these 13-degree below average temperature anomalies. But it is definitely possible that we have a little bit of a cooling down as we go towards the end of August, which could pose for some good relief in areas that have been sweating beyond belief over the last few weeks. All right, back to the weather that's actually happening over the next few days. Here's what's driving all of our severe weather over the next few days and just basically all of our weather in the country right now. We do have a significant high pressure ridge at the upper levels. This is at 200 millibars. So where the jet stream is, essentially, you're going to notice that jet stream meandering all the way up to the north as it comes off the Rockies through the northern plains and northern Midwest, even the Great Lakes and down through the Northeast, where you're going to see a jet streak is actually going to be present this afternoon in the Northeast, and that's going to aid that severe weather threat up there in the Northeast. It's part of the driving factor behind that marginal risk. And then as we go forward into our forecast period towards Friday, that pattern is not really going to change. So you're going to notice that a lot of areas down in the south are going to be hot. Looking at our 500 millibar winds, which is going to be indicative of rising motion associated with divergence aloft, you're going to notice that we are going to have increased rising motion into this afternoon, which again, this is Thursday as we go through Iowa and Illinois. That's going to be the driving factor behind some of our severe weather threat there. That is going to continue to push off through the Ohio Valley over time as we roll into the evening here on Thursday. And then as we go ahead forward into Friday, you're going to notice another area of divergence is going to start to appear back towards Illinois, even into the overnight hours. This is all the way towards Saturday at 1 a.m. now. You're also going to notice that back towards the northeast in that area of concern, we're going to have pretty strong flow throughout the entire forecast period here, really, especially as we go forward into later this evening and even overnight on Friday and into Friday afternoon. You're going to see a lot of rising motion possible out there, where we could see various thunderstorm development and perhaps some severe storms, especially today. Now, this vorticity map is going to get a little bit messier, but bear with me here. You're going to notice that we're going to have a lot of areas that are spinning counterclockwise, these localized surface low pressure systems where thunderstorms revolve around them. That's what we're seeing right now out there in Iowa. That's going to continue on towards Illinois and Indiana this afternoon. This is at 4 p.m. here on Thursday. And you're going to see multiple other areas are going to develop like this, where we have very spiked values in our vorticity as we go forward in the forecast period. Here's another one rolling through Nebraska right now and into western Iowa here as we go into Friday morning. So multiple different MCVs could be possible during our forecast period here. This one even going to continue as we go into the overnight hours on Friday night and into the AM hours on Saturday, potentially through areas like Chicago, where we could have more thunderstorm development associated with other MCV action. So that is why we're going to have that risk for at least a handful of tornadoes, because those MCV systems can oftentimes bring that elevated tornado threat embedded within them. And again, we're seeing that already this morning out in Iowa. Paired with all that vorticity is going to be a lot of instability you're going to see over our forecast period here, especially as we go into the afternoon and evening, of course, after peak heating. Lots of instability present throughout all of that area where we have that marginal risk in place for severe weather, including that slight risk back towards Iowa and Illinois this afternoon. And then as we go forward into Friday afternoon, you're going to see a lot more instability building as well, especially back towards Indiana and Illinois, where I do think there could be an elevated risk for potentially that 15% wind threat that I talked about earlier. Maybe a slight 2 out of 5 risk could be in play for tomorrow in that region as well. But a lot of instability will be present for these storms to work with. That upper level synoptic support is going to be there. It's going to be quite the well-sheared environment, even as we roll forward into the afternoon here, looking at Illinois and Iowa, and eventually down into Indiana and the Ohio Valley. You're going to notice a very, very well-sheared environment, which is going to allow that MCV, that spinning cluster of storms, to remain organized and sustain itself. A lot of instability to work with too, as that diurnal heating comes in. Essentially, the sun comes out and gives us more instability. And that environment is going to persist as we roll on into the evening here tonight. This is by Thursday at 7 p.m. You're going to notice still a very well-sheared environment even by 9 p.m. here. And then as we go forward into Friday, it's not going to be quite as much of a well-sheared environment here on Friday, but you're going to see in the early afternoon, still looking at a decently sheared environment. And then as we go into the evening, there's still going to be a little bit of upper level support in place. It's just not going to be quite as significant as it is today. Today on Thursday is going to have quite the sheared environment. And finally, I did want to show you a temperature map at the surface, and I'll show you the dew points too in a second here. And the reason I'm showing you this isn't just because it's going to get super, super hot back towards Kansas and Oklahoma, but it's also because I wanted to show off where this ridge is kind of setting up. You can see those surface temperatures are significantly warmer underneath that ridge, where you have that upper level flow along this blue arrow, and then below that second blue line, you're going to have that high pressure system setting up. And where those storms are flowing along that arrow there, that is where the greatest concern is going to be for any storms to potentially interact with these boundaries that could set up in various instances along the edge of that ridge. And that could pose that threat for artificial spin ingested into those storms, should any storms remain discrete and interact with a boundary like that. And that could increase the risk on the local scale for a tornado in those moments. So it's something that we want to pay attention to. And that's why there's going to be a lot of uncertainty around the forecast as we go forward over the next 2 days. But one thing that there's going to be a lot of confidence in is just how much moisture is going to be in the region. You're going to see by 4 p.m. here on Friday, that's kind of that peak heating hour, the Corn Belt doing what it does with a dew point near 75 forecast near Davenport, Iowa. That's really, really high. So we could see some pretty scarily high heat index values, basically anywhere east of the Rockies at different times as we go forward through Friday and into this weekend, even today on Thursday, of course, basically everywhere except the Northeast, which is pretty normal and standard for that region. And as we're filming this, we did just get a confirmed tornado in Iowa, and that's why these MCV systems are so important to pay attention to, because they bring that threat for embedded and spin up tornadoes. And again, I know it's only a 2% tornado risk. I know it's only a 2 out of 5 slight risk in terms of the categorical outlook, but it's something that you need to make sure you have multiple ways to receive alerts for, just in case something like this happens in your area. But that's going to take us to the end of today's forecast. Thank you so much for tuning in and trusting us as your source of weather coverage around the United States and even into Canada. We're going to be seeing you guys hopefully for Met Mondays on Monday, and maybe we'll be live at some point this weekend, especially maybe on Saturday as well. So stay tuned. Make sure you're liking and subscribing so that you know when we go live, and we'll see you guys soon. Stay safe out there.